The moment Clara Benson saw her suitcase land with a dull thud on the front porch, she knew 12 years of silence were about to pay off in ways no one could imagine. She stood there, still wearing her best Sunday dress, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, watching as her only son, her flesh and blood, locked the door behind her. It was raining softly, the kind of drizzle that made everything smell of wet wood and betrayal. Clara didn't speak. She just stood still, clutching her purse, her heart heavy yet strangely calm. Little did they know that the woman they'd just thrown out like yesterday's garbage would one day own the most expensive mansion in Crestwood Heights. "My name is Clara Benson," she'd later say into the camera, her tone calm but proud. "And this is the story of how a 60-year-old widow went from homeless to millionaire." Then she'd lean forward and add, "If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because revenge, my dear, isn't a dish best served cold. It's best served with success." At 72, Clara had learned that the sweetest victory wasn't anger. It was achievement. And her son, David, along with his picture-perfect wife, Renee, had given her all the motivation she needed. It all began on October 15, 2012. Clara had been living with David and Renee for 3 months after her husband's death. She was helping with their 2 children, Ella, age 5, and Matthew, age 3, while she figured out what came next. Her husband's small life insurance payout had already gone toward the funeral and bills. Family, she'd believed, was supposed to help each other in hard times. That morning, while she was preparing breakfast, David entered the kitchen with a look she had never seen before. Cold, distant, rehearsed. "Mom, we need to talk," David said quietly. His wife, Renee, stood behind him, arms folded, her expression smug and polished. She was 33, sharp-featured, with beauty that cut rather than softened. "What's wrong, honey?" Clara asked, setting her coffee down on the granite countertop, the same countertop she'd helped them afford using her Social Security checks. "This arrangement isn't working," Renee said flatly, stepping forward. "You're too set in your ways, Clara. The children are confused about who's in charge." Clara's lips trembled. "I'm just trying to help," she whispered. "They're my grandchildren." Renee shrugged. "Exactly. And they're getting mixed signals." She turned to David. "We agreed this was temporary." David wouldn't meet his mother's eyes. "Where am I supposed to go?" Clara asked softly. Her voice sounded small, unfamiliar even to her own ears. "That's not our problem anymore," Renee replied. "You're a grown woman. You'll figure it out." And just like that, a lifetime of sacrifice, of working double shifts and raising David alone after his father left, was dismissed with one cruel sentence. 20 minutes later, Clara's entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 60 years of memories reduced to whatever she could carry. The rest, Renee had said, would be donated. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," David muttered as he placed her bags on the porch. Clara saw a flicker of the little boy who used to cry when she left for work, but it vanished the moment Renee appeared beside him. When the taxi pulled up, the rain had started falling harder. Clara climbed in without looking back, not because she was strong, but because she was too broken to risk crumbling. The Sunset Motel on Route 9 became her new home. It cost $43 a night, the cheapest she could find. The air smelled of bleach and loneliness. Still, it had a roof and a lock, and after being discarded like trash, that felt like luxury. Mr. Patterson, the elderly desk clerk, noticed her quiet dignity after a few days. "You're not like our usual guests," he said kindly, slipping her an extra towel. "Most folks here are running from something." Clara smiled faintly. "I suppose I am too," she said. "Just not in the way you think." Each morning, Clara woke to the sound of the broken air conditioner rattling. The silence afterward was heavy, suffocating. No laughter from her grandchildren, no clinking of coffee cups, just emptiness. Still, she wasn't the type of woman to stay down for long. She'd survived harder times before. When David was young, she'd cleaned offices at night and worked as a cashier during the day just to keep the lights on. Survival was her second language. "I've done this before," she told herself one morning in the mirror. I can do it again. Her first step was to walk to the public library every morning. It was free, quiet, and filled with opportunity. There, she used the computers to browse job listings and fill out applications. Most companies didn't even respond. Who wanted to hire a 60-year-old widow? But Clara didn't stop. Experience in bookkeeping? Asked a woman during one of her interviews. 20 years, Clara answered proudly. I handled finances for my late husband's contracting business. The woman, Sarah Monroe, owned a struggling garden center. She looked Clara over and said, "The pay's not much, $15 an hour." Clara smiled. "When do I start?" Her first paycheck, $240. Felt like a lifeline. She treated herself to a small coffee maker and a second-hand plant for her motel window. Slowly, her temporary room began to feel like a home. She hung photos of David as a child, even though looking at them hurt. "If this is my life now," she whispered one night, "I'll live it with dignity." She didn't know it then, but that small act of self-respect, the decision to live, not merely survive, was the first seed of an empire. 3 months into her new job, Clara noticed something strange at Monroe's garden center. Every season, Sarah threw away piles of unsold plants, dozens of pots filled with what she called dead stock. "That's business," Sarah said with a shrug when Clara asked. "We can't sell what doesn't bloom." But Clara saw something else entirely. "They're not dead," she said one afternoon, kneeling beside a withered pot of hydrangeas. "They're just waiting for a little attention." Sarah laughed softly. "You want to waste your time reviving trash? Be my guest." That night, Clara carried 3 truckloads of trash up to her tiny studio apartment above Tony's Pizza. Her landlord looked at her suspiciously. "You growing a forest up there, Ms. Benson?" he asked. "Just hope and hard work," she replied with a grin. Within weeks, every windowsill, corner, and table in the apartment was filled with pots. She watched online tutorials, read gardening manuals from the library, and spent her evenings pruning, watering, whispering to her plants like they were children. Mrs. Chen from downstairs often muttered, "Too many plants. Too many." But Clara didn't care. Something was growing inside her too, purpose. By February, small green shoots began to appear. It was like watching life push back against death itself. "Well, I'll be," Clara murmured one morning as the first bloom opened. Her heart swelled with pride. When she brought the plants back to the garden center, Sarah's jaw dropped. "Clara, what did you do?" she asked, touching a petal like it was a miracle. "Just gave them a second chance," Clara said. Sarah bought every pot back for half price, and Clara walked out that day with $847, more than her entire first month's salary. But what she really gained was confidence. Soon Sarah and Clara had an agreement. Instead of throwing plants away, Sarah would let Clara take them home. Clara would revive them over the winter, and they'd split the profits in the spring. "It's a win-win," Sarah said one morning, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're turning trash into treasure." Word spread fast. Other garden shops started calling. "Are you the lady who brings dead plants back to life?" one manager asked over the phone. "That's me," Clara said with a laugh. "Though I prefer the term plant resurrection specialist." By the end of her second year, Clara's apartment looked like a tropical paradise. She'd rented part of the parking lot downstairs to store her growing collection. "You need a real facility," Sarah told her over coffee one morning. "This is bigger than both of us." Clara knew she was right. But she also knew she didn't have the money. She had $15,000 in savings, more than she'd ever had, but nowhere near enough to start a business. Still, she couldn't stop dreaming. "Maybe one day," she said softly, stirring her coffee. "Maybe sooner than you think," Sarah replied. That one day came sooner than expected when Clara met a woman named Evelyn Cruz at the Small Business Development Center. Evelyn was sharp, confident, and in her 50s, with eyes that missed nothing. After reviewing Clara's numbers, Evelyn said, "You're not just fixing plants, you're fixing waste. That's an entire industry problem." Clara blinked. "Industry problem?" "Yes. Evelyn continued. Every year, garden centers throw away millions in dead stock. If you can teach others how to do what you do, you could franchise this. Clara stared at her. Franchise? Me? Evelyn smiled. Why not you? Over the next 6 months, Evelyn helped Clara write a business plan. It was exhausting. 47 pages of projections, charts, and risk assessments. This part makes my head spin, Clara complained one night, rubbing her temples. Evelyn laughed. That's why God made coffee. When Clara finally sat in front of the loan officer, she was nervous but steady. Your projections seem optimistic, the officer said. Clara leaned forward. Sir, 3 years ago, I lived in a motel room with less than $1,000 to my name. Last year, I turned $50,000 worth of discarded plants into $200,000 in sales. Optimism isn't theory, it's proof. The loan came through. $150,000. Clara cried when she signed the papers, her hands trembling. Within 6 months, she leased a 5,000-square-foot warehouse and hired 2 part-time assistants. The sign above the door read, Relief Revival, because everything deserves a second chance. The name made her smile. It wasn't just about plants anymore. It was about people like her. Discarded, overlooked, but still full of life. She often told her employees, we don't throw things away here. We bring them back. By the 5th year, Relief Revival had become a phenomenon. They operated in 12 states with 47 licensed operators. Clara's story caught the attention of industry leaders. Mrs. Benson, said Mark Daniels, the sustainability director at Home Depot, shaking her hand during a conference, your business model is revolutionary. Turning waste into profit. It's the future. Clara smiled. It's also the past, she said. I've been turning struggle into strength my whole life. Her words earned a standing ovation. For the first time in years, she wasn't surviving, she was thriving. Her finances soared. Relief Revival brought in over $2 million annually, and her personal net worth crossed 7 figures. But what mattered most wasn't the money, it was the independence. Clara now lived in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment with a small garden where she experimented with new techniques. Every leaf she saved reminded her of what she'd overcome. On quiet evenings, she'd sip tea on her balcony, whispering to her plants, they threw me away, and I grew anyway. She didn't yet know that her next act of revenge would be her most poetic one yet. It began as a simple idea. Moving into a bigger space. Clara told herself she needed room for her growing business files, her indoor plants, and her peace. But deep down, she knew it was something else entirely. You're not just buying a house, Evelyn teased over lunch one afternoon. You're buying a statement. Clara smiled knowingly. Then I want it to be loud and clear. She started searching. The first few properties were nice, but nothing felt right. Until her realtor, Nina Walsh, mentioned a name that made Clara's heart skip. The Whitmore Estate, Nina said. It's the most prestigious property in Crestwood Heights. Crestwood Heights, the neighborhood David and Renee had once driven through on Sunday afternoons, dreaming out loud. One day, babe, Renee would say, her voice full of hunger. We'll live up here. They never could afford it. And now, 6 years later, Clara could. When Nina hesitated, warning, it's listed at $4.2 million, Clara simply replied. Let's take a look. The next morning, she stood before 12,000 square feet of elegance. Marble columns, sprawling gardens, and a glass conservatory larger than her old apartment. The estate looked like something out of a dream, and for Clara, it was the perfect revenge. The interior glowed with polished wood and crystal light. A grand staircase swept up in a graceful curve. The owners are relocating to Florida, Nina explained. They're hoping for a quick close. Clara's eyes roamed over the conservatory, sunlight streaming over rows of orchids. I'll make a cash offer, she said suddenly. Nina blinked. Excuse me. $3.8 million, Clara said firmly. Close in 2 weeks. Nina gaped. Are you sure? Completely. That night, Clara wrote the check with steady hands. Each stroke of her pen felt like reclaiming a piece of her dignity. The sellers accepted within 6 hours. 2 weeks later, Clara stood in the grand foyer holding the keys. The silence of the house was profound, not empty but peaceful. 12 years ago I was homeless, she whispered to herself, her voice echoing softly. Today, I own the most expensive house in the county. Her laughter filled the marble hall. The movers arrived with her modest furniture, which looked comically small in such grand rooms. Guess we'll need a shopping trip, she murmured, amused. That night, she sat on her massive back terrace watching the sunset melt into gold. For the first time she felt completely free. The next morning her phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn read, "Saw the real estate transfer in the paper. You magnificent woman. Champagne at my place this weekend." Clara smiled, typing back. "Only if you bring the good kind." What she didn't add was that she had a feeling her new beginning would soon attract old ghosts. When people discover you've risen, they remember your number. She looked over the quiet hills surrounding her mansion and whispered, "Let's see who comes knocking first." The doorbell rang at exactly 9:17 a.m. on Saturday, less than 24 hours after her purchase made the news. Clara was still learning which cabinet held the coffee mugs when she heard the chime. Through the security monitor, she saw them, David and Renee, standing on her porch like guilty strangers. Beside them were 2 teenagers she barely recognized, Ella, now 16, and Matthew, 14. Clara inhaled slowly, steadying her heartbeat. "Well, well," she murmured. The prodigals returned. She opened the door but didn't unlock the screen. "David. Renee. Children I barely know." Her tone was polite, sharp as glass. David tried a smile. "Mom, we saw the article about your new home. We wanted to congratulate you." "How thoughtful," she said evenly. "Congratulations delivered. Anything else?" Renee stepped forward with a dazzling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clara, we've had time to reflect. We realize we made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Clara interrupted. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Renee faltered. Ella shifted uncomfortably. "Grandma, Mom said you used to make the best cookies." The innocence in the girl's voice softened Clara for a moment, and sharpened her anger. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara said gently. "I did. But I stopped baking the day your parents threw me out." Silence fell like thunder. David swallowed hard. "Mom, please. Can we come in and talk?" "Talk about what?" Clara asked coolly. "Family," Renee said quickly. "Family should stick together." Clara's eyes narrowed. "How convenient that you rediscovered family the moment I became wealthy." David flushed. "That's not fair." "Oh, it's perfectly fair," she replied. "But sure. Let's talk." She stepped back, opening the door wide. "After all, there's plenty of room now." They followed her inside, their shoes clicking against the marble floor. The grand chandelier glistened above them. Ella's eyes widened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Mom, look, there's a pool." Renee's gaze swept over the furniture, the paintings, the view. "It's spacious," she said tightly. "Much too big for one person." Clara smiled faintly. "I like space. It helps me breathe." David sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, uneasy. "Mom, about what happened 6 years ago, we were under stress. New mortgage, new job, 2 small kids. So you made your widowed mother homeless," Clara finished. "That's one way to handle stress." Renee bristled. "We thought you'd figure something out. You've always been independent." "Independent," Clara repeated, her tone razor thin. "You never imagined I'd end up in a motel because you never cared enough to check." Ella was studying a framed photograph on the side table, David as a boy sitting in Clara's lap. "Dad, you look so young," she said softly. "That was right after your grandfather left," Clara explained. "Your father and I lived alone for 10 years. I worked 3 jobs to make sure he never missed a meal." Her gaze met David's. "Tell me, son, did any of that mean something?" David's lips trembled slightly. "Of course it meant something, Mom. Means everything. That's why we're here now. Clara leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. No, David. You're here because you want something. The question is, will you admit it? Renee's smile cracked. Fine, she snapped. You want honesty. We need help. David lost his job 3 months ago. We're behind on the mortgage. Ella's college applications are due and… Clara interrupted, lifting her teacup calmly. So the truth finally blooms. Renee's tone turned defensive. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. You have this whole mansion, and we're just trying to get back on our feet. You want to move in, Clara said flatly. David exchanged a quick glance with Renee. Just for a little while, he said. Maybe 6 months. Until things get better. Clara looked around her beautiful spacious living room, the velvet furniture, the sun spilling through high windows, the silence she cherished. Then she turned back to them. You mean you want me to house the same people who once locked me out in the rain? Mom, that's not fair, David protested. We were under pressure. And now I'm supposed to relieve it, Clara replied. Funny how life works. Renee folded her arms. We're family, Clara. Clara's eyes gleamed. Family, she repeated slowly. Is that what you called it when you shoved my suitcase onto the porch? The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. The teenagers looked confused, their gazes darting between the adults. What's going on? Matthew finally asked. Clara turned toward him gently. Sweetheart, sit down. You both need to hear this. David stiffened. Mom, don't. Oh, I think I will, Clara said softly. Ella, Matthew, 6 years ago your grandfather passed away. I was lost, and your parents offered to let me stay while I figured things out. I helped with you too, paid part of the bills, cooked meals and took care of the house. But one morning your mother decided I was too set in my ways. She paused, her voice steady but heavy. So your father packed my things, put them on the porch and told me to leave. Matthew blinked, disbelief flooding his face. Dad, is that true? David's mouth opened then closed. It wasn't like that, he said weakly. Your grandmother was interfering, Renee interjected sharply. Undermining us with the kids. Clara turned toward her. I made them breakfast and taught them to say please and thank you. Apparently that's interference now. Ella frowned. Where did you go after that? Clara smiled sadly. A motel. $43 a night. 6 weeks of wondering how my own child could turn me out. The room fell silent. Even Renee's confidence seemed to falter. Clara continued quietly. Then I worked hard. Found a job at a garden center, started bringing plants back to life. Turned it into a business. One that now operates in 12 states. David's voice was small. I didn't know it would come to this. You didn't care what it came to, Clara replied sharply. Then she picked up her phone, scrolling. I wasn't sure if I'd bring this up, she murmured. But since we're being honest. She held up her phone. I got a message this morning from an old friend at the unemployment office. David's shoulders stiffened. She said she saw a familiar name in her files. David Benson, terminated 6 months ago for falsifying expense reports. David's face drained of color. How did you? I know things, Clara interrupted. Like how Renee opened 3 new credit cards and maxed them out. Or how you refinanced your house twice for that Italian vacation. And now you're losing the home you threw me out of. The silence was thick. Ella's voice trembled. Dad, is that true? David's head fell into his hands. I made mistakes, he muttered. We both did. You didn't just make mistakes, Clara said quietly. You lied. You watched me struggle, and you did nothing. Her voice softened but her words cut deep. Do you know, David, I used to pray every night that you'd call? Just to ask if I was alive. Renee stood abruptly. Enough. You think you're perfect, Clara. You disappeared. You could have called us. Clara's laughter was low and humorless. Called the people who told me to figure out my life. I tried that once, Renee. It ended with me standing in the rain holding 2 suitcases. You're cruel, Renee hissed. No, Clara said, rising slowly. I'm honest. And for the first time in years, I'm speaking my truth. She looked toward the teenagers, whose faces were pale and bewildered. Your parents didn't lose me. They threw me away. But here's the beautiful part. I learned how to bloom in the dirt they buried me in. Tears glistened in Ella's eyes. You mean? Dad lied. All those years he said you moved away because you didn't want us. Clara nodded gently. He told you what was easiest. The truth was harder to face. Matthew clenched his fists. That's not right. Renee turned on David. You told them what? He winced. I didn't think they'd understand. They understand now, Clara said softly. Every word. The room fell silent again, the kind of silence that comes when lies finally collapse under their own weight. Clara took a slow breath. Her gaze steady. There's something else you all deserve to know. David's eyes widened. Mom, please don't. But she continued. About 6 months after I moved out, your father came to see me. Renee turned sharply. What? Clara smiled faintly. Oh, he didn't tell you that part. Interesting. She reached into a folder on the side table and pulled out an old photograph, an image of a handwritten letter on yellow legal paper. He came to my apartment one night. He'd been drinking. He cried. And he left this. David's voice cracked. Mom, that was years ago. I wasn't in my right mind. Clara ignored him and began reading aloud. Mom, I don't know how to live with what I've done. I let Renee convince me to throw you out, and now the house feels empty. I miss your voice in the mornings. I miss the smell of coffee. I'm sorry for everything. Please don't tell Renee I came. She said she'd leave me if I ever brought you back. She folded the page carefully. That's your father's handwriting, Ella. I took a photo in case the original got lost. Renee's jaw tightened. You wrote her a letter, she demanded. Behind my back. David rubbed his forehead. I was drunk, Renee. I wasn't thinking clearly. No, Clara said softly. That's the first time you were thinking clearly. Renee's face flushed with fury. So you lied to me. 4 years. I was trying to keep our family together, David snapped. By throwing your mother out, she shot back. Clara stood quietly by the fireplace, watching them unravel. Don't fight on my account, she said dryly. You've already done enough damage. Ella's voice broke the tension. Dad, how could you, she whispered. You made us believe Grandma didn't want us. Tears welled in her eyes. You stole 6 years from us. David tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. Don't, she said firmly. You lied to me. Matthew crossed his arms, glaring. I used to think Grandma was cold. But now I know who really was. His words hit like stones. Clara's heart ached for the children, not out of pity, but for the truth they'd finally been given. Renee turned toward Clara, her tone sharp again. You think you're blameless. You're just punishing us now because you can. Clara met her eyes. I'm not punishing you, Renee. I'm protecting myself. And maybe teaching you a lesson life should have taught you years ago. That cruelty always circles back. Renee scoffed. Oh, please. You think a mansion makes you better than us? No, Clara replied evenly. But it does make me comfortable enough to choose who I let inside. David tried again, his voice softer now. Mom, I know we hurt you. But please, we're trying to make things right. Clara tilted her head. Are you? Or are you just hoping my success will bail you out? He said nothing. That's what I thought, she murmured. You threw me away when I was poor, and now you remember I exist because I'm rich. Forgive me if I question your motives. The words landed like a gavel strike. Renee looked away, fuming silently. Matthew spoke hesitantly. Grandma, do you hate them? Clara smiled sadly. No, sweetheart. Hate takes too much energy. I simply learned how to live without them. She looked out the window toward the sprawling gardens below. When you're tossed aside, you have two choices: wilt or root deeper. I chose to root. Her calmness carried more power than anger ever could. And now I know. I don't need to prove my worth to anyone who couldn't see it when I had nothing. Renee stood abruptly. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We came here to apologize, and you're turning it into a courtroom. Clara raised an eyebrow. An apology followed by a request for housing isn't an apology. It's negotiation. David stood too exasperated. Mom, please. We're family. Clara's tone cooled. And you should have remembered that before locking me out. I survived 6 years without you, David. I think I'll manage another 6. Renee grabbed her purse. Fine. We'll leave. But Ella didn't move. I'm staying, she said quietly. Renee turned in disbelief. Excuse me. I want to hear Grandma's side, Ella said firmly. All of it. Matthew nodded. Me too. David tried to intervene. Kids, let's go. No, Ella replied. You lied to us. You don't get to control this part. Clara watched her grandchildren, strong, brave, standing up for truth, and felt something bloom in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Maybe we should let them talk, David murmured to Renee. They deserve to understand. You're unbelievable, Renee hissed. Don't you dare take her side. I'm not taking sides, he said quietly. I'm facing what I did. For a brief moment, Clara saw the man she once knew, the boy who used to cry when she left for night shifts. But the moment faded. Fine, Renee said sharply. But we're not done, Clara. We'll be back. Clara met her gaze calmly. Not unless you're invited. This house doesn't open its doors to arrogance anymore. The heavy front door shut softly behind David and Renee, leaving only Clara and her grandchildren in the quiet of the grand living room. The silence wasn't awkward, it was healing. Ella turned to her grandmother, tears still clinging to her lashes. I can't believe all this time. We thought you didn't want us. Clara gently cupped her face. Oh, sweetheart, I wanted nothing more than to see you grow. Every birthday, every Christmas I thought about you both. You were never forgotten. Matthew sat forward, his voice trembling. Can we come back? Just to visit? Clara smiled warmly. Anytime you want. This house is yours as much as mine. At least the good parts of it. She winked, and both teenagers laughed softly through their tears. For 2 hours they sat together. Clara showed them old photo albums, pictures of David as a young boy with scraped knees and a wide grin. Your dad used to collect bottle caps, she said, chuckling. Said they were treasure. Ella's laughter filled the room. He never told us that. He doesn't remember the small things anymore, Clara said gently. Sometimes people forget what matters when they chase what doesn't. As the conversation drifted, Clara noticed something she hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet and steady, like the hum of contentment beneath her ribs. She realized she didn't need apologies to heal. She just needed truth. When the children finally stood to leave, Ella hugged her tightly. I'm so proud of you, Grandma, she whispered. Matthew nodded. Me too. You didn't just survive, you built something. Clara smiled. I built myself. Everything else was just decoration. After they drove away, Clara stood at the window, watching their car wind down the long driveway. The sunset bathed the hills in gold, the same color as her triumph. She whispered, They threw me away, but I grew anyway. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was gratitude. She had turned pain into purpose, rejection into restoration. Each scar had become a seed, and every seed had bloomed into success. She walked through the quiet halls of her mansion, each step echoing softly like a reminder of how far she'd come. Later that evening she called Evelyn. You'll never believe who showed up at my doorstep, she said. Evelyn laughed knowingly. Let me guess, the same people who disappeared when you were struggling. Exactly, Clara replied, smiling faintly. And how did that go better than expected? I didn't raise my voice once. Evelyn chuckled. That's how you know you've won, Clara. Real power doesn't shout, it just stands there. Unbothered. Clara leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea. I think you're right. I finally feel balanced. The next morning, Clara wandered through her garden, her sanctuary. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh soil. Rows of rescued plants surrounded her, each one a survivor, just like her. She touched a blooming rose, its petals flawless. You and I, we understand each other, she murmured. We were both supposed to die, and look at us now. Her phone buzzed. A message from Sarah, her old employer turned business partner. Just read the article about you in the business journal. You're a legend, Clara. Clara laughed softly. A legend. Maybe just a late bloomer. Her days became gentler after that. She hosted weekend visits with Ella and Matthew, taught them how to care for plants, and shared stories of resilience. The mansion, once a symbol of revenge, became a home filled with new laughter. One afternoon, Matthew asked, Grandma, do you ever miss them? Dad and Mom. Clara thought for a long moment before replying. Miss them. Maybe the people they used to be. But the truth is, sometimes you have to let go of who hurt you to grow into who you're meant to be. News of Clara's empire continued to spread. Magazines called her the woman who revived more than plants. TV hosts wanted interviews. But she never boasted. When asked how she turned her life around, she'd simply smile and say, everything grows better after pruning. People laughed, but those who knew pain understood. Behind every word was the weight of years. Years of silence, survival, and strength. She had pruned her past and watched a new life blossom. On her 72nd birthday, Clara threw a small garden party at her estate. Evelyn, Sarah, and a few close friends gathered around a long wooden table surrounded by blooming lilies. Ella and Matthew were there too, helping serve cake. To second chances, Evelyn toasted, raising her glass. And to women who refuse to stay buried, Sarah added with a grin. Clara smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. To growth, she said softly. The kind that starts in broken soil. The clinking of glasses echoed like music. That night, as the guests left and the lights dimmed, Clara sat alone on her veranda overlooking the moonlit garden. The air was cool and quiet. She picked up her phone, started recording, and smiled into the camera. If you're watching this, she said warmly, remember this one thing: being thrown away doesn't make you worthless. It just means someone couldn't see your value. She leaned back, her voice steady and proud. They called me too old, too stubborn, too broken. But I turned every insult into soil and grew an empire from it. So, to everyone watching, bloom anyway. She ended the recording with a laugh. And don't forget to subscribe.